Hello, hello, hello. It's time for another episode of the podcast. Today we'll be discussing the patch notes, and I have Threats joining me to discuss them. He was dying to get his thoughts out there. And I think, first of all, Threat will just go over... well, I'll let you actually do the honors. We can go over the patch notes as far as the changes that have been made to the economy.
Yeah, so this is probably the biggest patch to CS in... I would almost say history, maybe 1.5 to 1.6, but they've never changed the economy system this much. So what they've changed is instead of being completely reset, if you win a round when you're on a loss streak, you instead accumulate loss points. So let's say, for example, that you've lost 5 rounds in a row. Your loss counter is at 5. Of course, you will still only get $3,400. You can never get more than that. But if you then win a round, so the score is 1 to 5, your counter goes down to 4. If you then lose another round, in the old patch, you would only get 1,400. You would be, as we call it, reset. You would instead get 3,400 again, making it way easier for a comeback.
So this is kind of interesting because obviously a lot of people, we know that if there's change, everyone's going to be like, oh my God, there's change. And we're going to think that it's bad immediately. And of course, I think this change is really huge. It really, really fundamentally impacts the way Counterstrike is going to look, as opposed to, let's say, when we saw the last economy change, which I think when I first saw those patch notes, I was like, yeah, that sounds great. That just kind of makes sense. We get less variance on the pistol rounds. And so it felt like, okay, well, that's obvious that's going to play out well. And not everyone agreed, but I think that was a more clear cut how it would impact the game, because it just really affected the pistol rounds, and that's basically it. And so with this change, obviously, it's much the changes to how the game's going to be played, or how it will look on the top level. We're going to see a lot more gun rounds. We're not going to have that intensity where it's like, oh my God, if they lose this round, they're going to get reset, or there might be less of those situations. As far as an entertainment factor goes, do you think we'll be missing something there, or are we going to get something back instead? Because I know that's one of those points of the narrative within a game that can be this huge turning point, and it can be pretty awesome to see, but it can also be really shit, because if it's like the 5-0 situation or the 4-0 situation, you get the buy, you win the rounds, then you've been losing your money up until that point, and then you get reset, and then it's like 7-1, and that's a typically terrible game. And we've had many massive upsets. I think most notably the NIP Vega upset was one of those. So we'll lose that situation. That's not going to happen anymore. So we do reduce some variance. So do you think that it's overall net positive, or where do you stand on this and how it will impact the game going forwards?
Well, for viewership, I agree with you. There will be less variance. So in that case, it's a con, because teams like Astralis are going to have an easier time than they had before, which, well, you want variance. You want to have these upsets. But at the same time, I think because there's less risk in going for, let's say, a 2v3 retake, you're going to see way more of those rounds, and you're going to see more like cool clutches. Let's say you're down 5-0 as CT on +2. You win a round, you win a after plant, you only have 2 players surviving. The next round, you lose, let's say, 2 players immediately. In the current patch, that would mean, okay, we just have to save these weapons. We're going to get reset. If we don't save them, they're going to get up to 8-1. Instead, now you can try to go for a stack. Maybe you can try to win the round, because even if you lose, you're still going to get $3,400. So there's way less risk, which I guess can kind of be a con. But I really like that we're going to see more risky plays and more hard retakes.
I think that's definitely a really cool benefit, because it's kind of like I would say, what we got from the last economy change, where it's like, well, we get more Counterstrike effectively because we get more buy rounds. And I actually think that something that I haven't really seen discussed too much, but for me is a big plus too, on top of the additional action that you just mentioned and those decisions. I think it would be very beneficial in as far as the mind games goes between teams, because you'll get a team like Na'Vi. Like this is how I interpret Na'Vi, generally speaking. Like Na'Vi, I feel like one of the reasons why they match up so poorly against Astralis, let's say, very quickly, is because they're not really a default heavy team. They're not a team that's super focused around incredible tactics and map control and all this kind of stuff. But they like to condition their opponents. They like to use pacing a lot to try to throw off timings of their opponents. They like to set up expectation of what their opponents think they're going to do based on what they've already done. And then they try to use that as a read to then, hit you somewhere where maybe you're pushing mid because you're expecting them to focus around mid, but then they hit an extremity of the map and they get an advantage like that. They like to get in your heads, and I feel like we'll get more gun rounds, so we'll get more opportunity for teams to do that. And especially on the T side, when you can do more with less economy, I think we're going to get more exciting T sides. I do wonder, though, whether or not, because we'll see more T-side buys, whether there's going to be a problem with the fact that the CT buys are so expensive overall. But do you think does that make any sense, what I just said? Or how do you feel about that element to the additional gun rounds as well?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think this will benefit the terrorist. And also in another way, let's say I have a strong lead as CT. And they win a round, maybe you force them to a Glock eco, you reset them. That's actually a thing that most people forget. So let's say the terrorist team is on a full eco. Let's say Astralis is playing, there's a very big chance that they're going to survive with at least 4 players, which means they will start to build a bank. And if the terrorists have a lot more money, they have more utility, they have better weapons, it's going to be way harder to build a bank as CT as well, giving the terrorists even more opportunities to mount the comeback if they're down. Because I think that's one of the key things Valve and the viewers want to see, that especially on a map, let's say Inferno, where you can easily get a sick lead as CT and you can get in position as T, where it's basically nothing you can do. You manage to scrape 1 round win and then you immediately get reset and there's nothing you can do.
It's definitely brave, I have to say, of the developers to go for a change like this, because I think you kind of highlighted it, that it does seem like they're trying to really understand and improve the quality of the viewing experience. And one of the things about Counterstrike as well is that I think viewing experience and sort of playing experience can align pretty well in this case, when we see that, okay, one of the things is that we lose intensity because there's less gun rounds, there's too many pistol rounds, there's the saving, and what are the most boring aspects of the game? Well, when a team gets reset, or when a team wins a pistol round and then the other team's just kind of fucked over for a few rounds. I kind of like the idea that these changes do still benefit the teams that are better overall, and you can't really make an argument that I don't think that this punishes the better team in any way.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. As you said earlier, this is less variance. Less variance is always better for the better teams. So it's good and bad. I mean, we want to see the best teams win, but it's going to be... I think it feels like we're saying the same things over and over again, but that's kind of the main thing with this patch. It's going to be easier for the better teams, and there's going to be less upsets.
So do you want to move on to talking about some of the other changes?
Yeah, let's talk about a small one, that you can actually see flashbang assists now in the kill feed, which it doesn't affect the gameplay that much, but you can theorize about situations where you can see who threw the flashbang, and that could give you some information. Let's take Inferno, for example. Someone is pushing out banana. You get killed when you were blind, and you look at the kill feed, and it's like, oh, it's not the regular guy who actually threw that flash. You're probably going to be 3 guys B. Let's move fast towards A. That's quite a simple example, but it could actually be useful as a way to gather information.
Yeah, I feel like that's something that should be pretty easy to change and to tweak. So hopefully that's not going to be something that impacts the professional play, because I get, ultimately it'd be really cool for your teammates to only to be able to see it. And obviously it's really cool. It's super cool as a spectator feature, but obviously within a professional match, you don't want to be giving any hints or clues away during the actual game. I definitely agree. So I think people have been very, very vocal on that. I think it's such a minor change that I'm pretty confident that Valve will, fix that, so we don't have to worry about it too much. But yeah, it's cool. It's cool though. I think, moving things in a direction of trying to find ways to appreciate how much goes into setting up various kills, and that it's not just the guy that gets the headshot that necessarily has contributed to the round, and and he got set up by somebody, and I like that. That's cool. Hopefully we can get more stuff like that in the game, especially for the spectators, so they can enjoy what the professionals are actually doing. That they probably, it's funny because James said, I don't think he said that you should just remove it, but he made a joke on the broadcast yesterday, basically saying that like it doesn't really matter anyway, because in matchmaking no one flashes for each other anyway. So, but so any other thoughts on that one, or should we go on to one of the next changes?
Well, just a simple thing to add there. The people that are worried or too worried that this can affect gameplay with the information you get from the kill feed, as I mentioned earlier, I don't think you should worry that much, because you're still kind of getting that information from regular kill assist. So let's say someone has spammed a wall, maybe you're been running into a Molotov, you can still see who had the assist for that kill, and that's also information from the kill feed.
Absolutely. It's gonna be interesting to see how quickly Valve respond to this one, and how they tweak it, because I think the arguments are really clear. But I think one thing that's big, and of course we haven't really had a discussion about it, and I know a lot of people have very differing opinions, and I think there's like a few different ways you can cut this one. But the org is perhaps the other big deal, and the org change obviously has made people start using the org and really experiencing how strong the org is. And for me, the strength is actually in the consistency of the weapon. As far as the spray goes, I think the pattern is very easy to use. I think you can kind of tell when you're watching a professional match, and in the past you would see someone spraying with an M4. Requires a lot more control. The way that the pattern goes, the bullets go much more to the left and to the right. So that means it's much more likely that if your crosshairs on someone and you're on that 5th, 6th, 7th bullet on the spray, it's much more likely that those bullets will stray. So if you miss the first couple, maybe you're not getting that kill. But with the org, it kind of just it stays very tight to the spreads on the vertical element of the spray. So it means that even if you miss the first couple bullets, it's so easy to autocorrect it, and it's so easy to switch targets very quickly and still be sort of dead on. So it kind of looks like the skill ceiling is less with that weapon. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad thing, but is it? I guess the question here for you, Bjorn, is I guess you have to tell me exactly how you feel about it in every sense. But for me, the question is it that the weapon needs to be altered slightly in the way that the recoil is, or do you just need to make it a lot more expensive, or is it fine?
I think they need to make a slight nerf to the org, and the most interesting thing about it is I watched some ECS games yesterday and WESG where they played with a new patch, so they had the old price, and still everyone bought the org. I would call it the Tech 9 of 2019. If you remember, nobody used the Tech 9 back in, I think it was early 2014. And then I think it was Chris J who started using it, and I was like, oh, the Tech 9 is actually really good, and there's 32 bullets in each mag. Then everybody started using it, and then they had to nerf it. Even though it was actually in the game from the beginning, nobody used it, and the same thing goes with the AUG here. So I think we're gonna see the same thing repeat itself here. There's gonna be I think they're gonna over nerf it, because Valve have a tendency to do that. So over nerf it, and then probably gonna make it a bit better, and we're just gonna find a balance, because I feel like it's too strong right now. The problem is that it's just way better than both the M4A4 and the M4A1S.
And so what would you think would be an appropriate nerf? Do you think is because a lot of people think, oh, just make it more expensive, but I feel like that's not a great argument. If a gun is like very, very strong, I don't know if that makes sense per se. I feel like what you're talking about is or one of the important points that you mentioned is it's way, way stronger than the other rifles. Now again, it's a choice that you can make. Do you want it to be the case that one gun for that's a lot more expensive is generally a lot better at everything and is always the choice if you have that much money, or do you want to have 3 different decisions to make, which I always think is more compelling. It's like back when the CZ was super overpowered, you couldn't make an argument to pick up any other pistol, and that's just boring, I think, for gameplay. I think situational use of weapons, it becomes much more interesting for gameplay and at the top level. So I'm always of the camp that I want the gun to be a little bit weaker, just so that there are spots where you're like, well, actually the scope is super good on these spots that I play on train, but actually the M4A4, because of the rate of fire is and how it makes it much more compelling if I'm playing close positions and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think that's the main issue with the AUG. It's just too good in too many different kind of situations. If you look at what kind of situations you would think Valve wants the AUG to be good, it would be, as you mentioned, mid-range battles on train where you use the zoom. The problem now is that it has a very high rate of fire. I think they should very slightly decrease the rate of fire, because then it would be inferior to the A4 in close combat. I think train is a really good example of this, because you can play it mid-range. It's the strongest rifle, but you can, since it has such a high rate of fire, it's also probably the best rifle to use if you go aggressive pop tog or T-main. So there's really no way you can motivate buying any different weapon. Maybe the M4, the silenced M4, because you can like play around sandwich and play around the bomb train smokes and they won't hear you, but it's way too situational.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think for those of, I don't know if this will be too old for, as a reference for people to know about, but I can quickly describe that we had this problem when we went from Quake 3, from one patch in Quake 3 to another one, from OSP to CPMA, where there was this huge change to lightning gun that just made it like suddenly a weapon that, instead of being kind of situational, where it was only very reliable in very specific spots, it became point and click. So it became good at every single range, at every single spot. And then the game just became way less interesting, because the players that were very good mechanically got much more of an edge versus the players that were intelligent in how they thought about their fights ahead of time and how they picked their spots. And this just made it less interesting, because I think the games are always more interesting if you give a slight edge to decision making, because then it's the players that are mechanically amazing and from a decision making perspective also amazing that really stand out, and that raises the overall skill ceiling, I think, and just makes the gameplay much more diverse and much more interesting. And then when you get a spot where the AUG is definitely weak, or in this example, if the AUG is weakened, but it is still good at mid to far range, and maybe this guy gets this crazy spray and it's really close range and he's being rushed down, it adds some extra intensity and excitement. And to do that, not many people can do that consistently, but maybe there's one or two guys that can. Certain people can make a name for themselves with certain weapons, and I think that's really interesting, because the reason they're able to do that is because those weapons aren't the primary choice for some of those spots. And let's say Sneal with a FAMAS in 1.6. I actually don't know how accurate that example would be, but but yeah, I definitely don't think that I think I'm on the same page as you with this one. Speaking of which, weapon balance, unless there's anything else you want to add about the AUG?
Just wanted to add that I feel like the buff to the silence M4 is not enough.
Okay, yeah, that's where I was going next.
I think some players, yeah, exactly. Some players kind of use it, but it's not enough. It's 5 more bullets, but the rate of fire is too low. It's just a problem of DPS rather than.
You don't think that the silencer and its not having traces through smokes, mitigates this in any way?
I kind of want to touch the subject and talk about the shotguns at the same time, because you talked about this earlier now, where you want to have different choices with weapons, because to use them in different situations, and the shotguns are a very good example of this. Let's say you're holding B on Mirage, and the mag is only $1,300, and you can play close-up apartments with a mag, and that's actually a really strong position. Not only is it very cheap, you get a lot of money for each kill, you can easily steal an AK after you get the first kill, and it's just a very cheap way to be able to get a lot of utility and still have a very good B hold. The issue is it's way too situational. Even if you hold B where it's strong, most of the rounds you're going to retake A. So most of the rounds, it's not going to be good for what you're trying to use it for. And I kind of feel like that's the same problem with the silenced M4. let's say you're playing bomb train on train, and you want to sneak around the smoke, use the silencer, catching people off guard. It's not gonna work anyway, because you're still gonna have to retake B half of the rounds.
Right. Do you think that people are going to be just constantly going for shotgun buys, or like what do you think the landscape's going to look like?
I think people are gonna buy them in the beginning now because they are cheaper, and I guess if you're very low on money and you really need the utility, I guess you can kind of make a case for it. But I still think the problem is that they're too weak for retakes. You easily get put in a position where the shotgun is absolutely useless. You would rather use the silence USP, for example. So I think people are going to use it in the beginning, but then they're going to realize it's just way better to have a UMP.
Yeah, I was going to say actually the versatility of the pistols above them does make a lot of sense, because even as a CT sight, like obviously rushing with shotguns is awkward at the best of times, and holding sights close range. I mean, well, if you know that a team could be doing that, Molotovs very easily deals with that situation, and then you get pushed into a spot which sucks with the shotgun. Yeah, so that definitely seems like it. So we may see them more, but it's not going to change things too much. I'm not sure how the sawn-off change is going to affect things for the sawn-off, because I know that the sawn-off was like the bullets disappear after a few feet before, and so now they actually it has a better range potentials. But I'm not sure how that actually plays out, or like I'm not sure how to visualize that in the game yet. Right.
So sorry, I had to get to the
I was just saying that. I was just echoing your points, and
yeah, I heard you have wireless headphones. Yeah, but I agree. I think we agree about most things in this patch, and it's really hard to tell if it's gonna be for the better or for the worse. My first impression is that this is actually a good patch. I know a lot of people will disagree with me, but it's I think it makes the games kind of fresh. It is a big change, but I don't think it's changing. It's not changing the core of Counterstrike.
Right. It doesn't take. I wouldn't say that it lowers the skill ceiling, and I wouldn't say that it punishes the best teams. Which for me, those are two enormous things that I always will be thinking about, because we do not want the skill ceiling of the game to be lower. We do not want to increase the variance, and we don't want to punish teams that have worked incredibly hard to get as good as they are. Like, for example, if there's a patch that suddenly means that Astralis starts losing all the time, because there's more variance to the game or whatever it might be, then that's a huge problem. It's massively damaged the competitive integrity of the game and the core of the game. So I completely agree with you there. I think it's a good patch too.
Indeed. I think we've covered pretty much everything. Yeah, they've made some buffs to the shotguns themselves, increase the range of this is funny with the sort of or with the patch notes from Valve, sort of range increased to 1,400. They're like, oh, thank you. I totally know. It's like, okay, all that says is that it's increased.
Yeah,
I have no idea what
so
it was before.
That would be units, right? How many units per second do you travel at when you run? I know what it is in Quake, but I always forget what it is in Counter-Strike. I think it's somewhat similar. So it's like maybe like 280 or something, 300 units per second. So that would be like you pressing W. Was it 1,400? Did you say? Okay, so
yeah, it's 1,400 now.
That's like what 3 to 4 seconds of running forwards is the range roughly. But then obviously the spread comes into play. It's not going to be a railgun. So obviously the bullets just disappeared before. So I don't know if that really impacts things too much. But yeah, I guess unless you want to discuss anything else, I know we wanted to make a fairly compact podcast just covering the update. I think we can close it there and follow up with a podcast about something else later on, because I know there's a lot of interesting things going on in CS right now, which would be interesting to hear your thoughts on.
Yeah, absolutely. It was really fun discussing this. As you said earlier, desperately needed to talk about this patch with someone, and maybe we can get back to it when there have been some more matches, or maybe some hotfix patch from Valve.
Awesome. All right. Cheers.
Cheers.